Good afternoon and welcome to Manor College's Ukraine Dialogue Program. Thank you for joining us today at America's only accredited institution of higher education, founded by the Ukrainian Sisters of St. Basil the Great, remaining true to our Ukrainian heritage, unique as a college in the United States. We proudly say, Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. We thank our Board of Trustees Chairman Dennis McGrath, Manor's Ukrainian Community Committee of its Board of Trustees, chaired by Leonard Mazer. And we thank you for supporting our mission, our heritage, our programs, especially today's. Just to remind everyone, we are recording today's program, and it's important for us to acknowledge a special guest who's joining us via Zoom, Senator Art Haywood. He joins us tonight as an audience member, but I'd like to call him up for a brief moment to share remarks. Senator Haywood, for those who may not know him, is a wonderful community leader, a friend to Manor College, and a friend to Ukrainians in his district here in Pennsylvania and beyond. Senator, can we invite you to say a few words?
Thank you so much, President Perry, and to everyone who's involved with this Ukrainian Dialogue series. I'm really glad to join you and hear from this tremendous panel. Now, unfortunately, I have a cold and I'm trying to recover from that, so I may not be able to stay for the entire presentation. But I've been a lawyer for over 25 years and now in the state Senate for 10 years and have seen the power of creativity in business and in industry. And you've got a tremendous panel here of business and industry leaders who can help share the way and show us the way toward more innovation. I also want you to know that I and my colleagues are in full support of private enterprise and want to do all that we can to spur creativity and innovation in that sphere. But I also want you to know that there's a freedom that we all deserve that allows us to have an environment where that creativity can flourish. And I want you to know that I and my colleagues fully support the struggle in Ukraine for freedom and dignity. And that the freedom and dignity that's being fought for is not just for Ukraine, but for the entire world. So thank you so much for allowing me to be present with you in this invitation. I look to learn much from the spectacular panelists that will be speaking tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Let's also take a moment to thank Roman Popadiuk. He is the Chairman Emeritus of the Ukrainian Self-Reliance Federal Credit Union's Board, and Anatoli Murha is its president. Both have been instrumental to tonight's program, as they have been from the beginning. UKRFCU remains our lead and presenting sponsor, providing new opportunities for members of the credit union. And Roman, I'd like to ask you to please make brief opening remarks on behalf of the UKRFCU.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome, fellow panel members. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Ukrainian Self-Reliance Federal Credit Union and its more than 16,000 member account holders, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the fall 2024 session of Manor College's Ukraine Dialogues. This is the 17th Ukraine Dialogue session, and UKRFCU is proud to have joined with Manor in presenting these important community events over the last 10 years. My name is Roman Popadiuk, and I am honored to serve on UKRFCU's Board of Directors. On behalf of the board and its more than 70 employees, we are pleased that you are able to join us today. As many of you know, UKRFCU and Self-Reliance New York FCU have announced plans to merge. This merger will create a wholly new entity with a new name to serve our combined 30,000 plus members. With almost $2 billion in assets and access to substantial additional capital, the consolidated entity intends to quickly expand its services into Washington, D.C., as well as previously underserved New York City area communities. Under the visionary leadership of Anatoli Murha, UKRFCU's president, and one of today's panelists, I might add, our combined organizations will be offering an ever-expanding array of financial services to our growing membership while continuing our strong support of the community around which our members have built their lives here in the United States. UKRFCU's financial support makes the dialogue series possible, but in reality, we are so much more than a financial sponsor. UKRFCU approaches these events with the same passion and commitment that we bring to all of our work on behalf of the community. With the war, that commitment has been especially evident in our work on behalf of Ukrainians both here and in Ukraine. To better serve our recent arrivals, we have fundamentally restructured important aspects of our business model and have been able to enroll more than 3,000 new members from that community, offering them the opportunity to build a credit history through credit cards and other loans. Working with Manor College and the Ukrainian Educational and Cultural Center and other organizations, we have continued to support high-quality ESL, English as a Second Language classes in our region for Ukrainian refugees. We are especially proud that almost 20% of our credit union's workforce is made up of recent war refugees who came in through the U4U program into the United States. What was initially an emergency response has sadly become a part of our regular order of business as we learn to live with the consequences of Russia's genocidal war on Ukraine. In the dialogue series, we and Manor College are committed to bringing you speakers who offer knowledgeable and in-depth information about issues affecting Ukraine and the community. Our panel today will be discussing the ways in which private businesses are helping Ukraine and our diaspora community today and into the future. Dr. Perry, Manor College's president, will do the honors of introducing our distinguished panel. Dr. Perry.
Thank you very much, Roman. At Manor College, we are grateful for our collaboration with UKRFCU and other collaborations that help us to offer more than 30 associates, bachelor's, and certificate programs. We provide our students with excellent academic and transformative opportunities that enable them to fully develop as individuals. An education at Manor leads to an understanding of scientific, humanistic, and ethical principles, so our students form a global vision. As Roman mentioned, today is our 17th Ukraine Dialogue Series program. It's titled Business and Industry Innovations Helping Ukraine's Community. And as we were founded as a Ukrainian Catholic institution, our chaplain, Father John Trapita, has written a prayer for Ukraine and the world to start us off. Loving God, we pray for the people of Ukraine, for all those suffering or afraid, that you will be close to them and protect them. We pray for world leaders, for compassion, strength, and wisdom to guide their choices. We pray for the world that in this moment of crisis, we may reach out in solidarity to our brothers and sisters in need. May we walk in your ways so that peace and justice become a reality for the people of Ukraine and for all the world. Amen. So now let me please introduce our speakers. We are really blessed today with amazing speakers. They're all here today out of their own pure, gracious kindness to us. Once I introduce our speakers, I'll then introduce our moderator, and then he will get our conversation started. We welcome Anatoli Murha, CEO of UKRFCU. He is recognized as a strategic leader in business development and financial services, where his central focus is on building collaborative teams, encouraging the missing conversations, and cultivating purposeful relationships. UKRFCU does serve over 16,000 member clients with a combined asset value of over $500 million. Additionally, Anatoli serves as chairman of the Ukrainian American Credit Union Association, which represents over 130,000 Americans of Ukrainian descent with a combined asset value north of $4 billion. And as Roman mentioned, Anatoli has been designated the president and CEO of the new combined credit union, which is the result of two of the nation's largest Ukrainian-American credit unions joining together to create the strongest and most responsive credit union possible. Anatoli, I'm sure, will be sharing about this wonderful vision this evening. Bob Schena is CEO of Rajant. In 2002, he co-founded Rajant. He's the pioneer of kinetic mesh networks. These are fully mobile, private wireless networks that maintain continuous connectivity without the troublesome handoff issues that other wireless and Wi-Fi vendors experience. They easily integrate with existing satellite, fiber, LTE, and fixed wireless networks and sustain any node to any node connectivity. Mr. Schena has successfully grown this once small startup to a robust international presence in a broad array of markets, including military, industrial, transportation, utilities, and telecommunications. Today, Rajant is doing business in over 50 countries with large global partners and has offices across the US with one in Ukraine. Before Rajant, Bob co-founded AirClick, a successful wireless application and scanning company, and he has also been appointed to Pennsylvania's Ben Franklin Technology Board by Governor Ridge. That was in 2001. And then subsequently, he was reappointed by Governors Rendell and Wolf. And in 2010, he was named to Governor Corbett's Marcellus Shale Transition Team. Next is Irina Paliashvili. She's the president of the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council. She is a Ukrainian-American lawyer who assumed the role of president and CEO of the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council last July. Prior to that, she has been an integral part of USUBC and their governance team, having been consistently reelected to the executive committee by members for more than 20 years. She's also served as chair of their legal committee, supporting legal and judicial reforms in Ukraine, advocating for a rule of law, and promoting private sector development. Most recently, Dr. Paliashvili initiated the launch of the US UBC Legal Series webinars, offering members exclusive insights into the most pressing legal issues related to doing business in Ukraine. Next is Alexander Gordin, chair and co-founder of Rebuilding Ukraine Agency. He's also the chair and co-founder and chairman of Broad Street Capital Group. He has served as an advisor in over 30 countries to public and privately held businesses, spearheading development, financing, and management communications, automotive services, and alternative energy companies. He's handled several international financing assignments, mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, ranging in size from $300,000 to almost $450 million, $444 million to be precise. Mr. Gordin is an international merchant banking professional with over 20 years C-level experience. His clients include Fortune 500 companies and government enterprises. And Misha Rudominski is an entrepreneur and co-founder of Himera and Promin Aerospace. Now, Himera creates tactical communication systems for global defense forces. Their products were developed to meet the Ukrainian Defense Forces' need for scalable and secure communication solutions for the most complex electronic environments. He's a board member at Teco System and Networld, and he's been recognized as among the 30 under 30 by Forbes and the Kyiv Post. Misha is currently focused on bringing the most relevant and scalable communication systems to the Ukrainian Defense Forces. And I'm happy to share that again, our moderator for most of our programs of these 17 has been Ambassador Roman Popadiuk, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine. He's a retired member of the Career Senior Foreign Service. He has more than 30 years of experience in the areas of national security, political risk analysis, communications strategy, and energy policy, including serving on the National Security Councils of Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. With his vast experience and contacts that span the globe, Roman brings a unique insight into international political and business matters. He's written about and is frequently interviewed on issues relating to U.S.-Ukraine relations, the current situation in Ukraine, and other national security and global relations issues. In 2006, he served as an observer of the parliamentary election in Ukraine. He's a senior advisor to the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, so he knows Irina, and he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Let's please welcome our guest speakers and invite Ambassador Popadiuk to help us to begin the dialogue. Welcome and thank you. Ambassador. Kelly, can we help Ambassador to unmute?
Yeah, Ambassador, you have to unmute yourself.
And let's also transition.
My apologies. I thought, Kelly, you were going to unmute it. My mistake. I'm sorry.
I can only request. You have to accept it.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you very much. Jonathan, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I'm delighted to be here with you tonight to moderate this program. I think this series of panels that you've had over the years are very important for sharing information with the general public about Ukraine, the importance of Ukraine, and the role that the United States can play in helping strengthen Ukraine. So at first, I'd also like to acknowledge Senator Haywood. I think the Senator outlined very succinctly the optimism and the need for support of Ukraine. So it's very good that he sets a base, I guess, in which we will continue with in our discussions. Just to give you context, we're going to be talking about innovation and business in Ukraine, and we have to realize that this is discussions taking place with a back page in which Ukraine has already entered a third year of war, is well into the third year of war, and has had its economy devastated. If you look at the World Bank figures from earlier this year, the World Bank estimated that it'll take approximately $486 billion in a post-war Ukraine to rebuild the country. I think obviously that's at the low end of the figure. My estimation, I think that figure is going to grow. But outside of that, there's also the issue of agricultural land. For example, much of Ukraine's agricultural soil has been contaminated via mining operations that the Russians have undertaken, as well as by the Ukrainian side that had to defend itself. But also the constant bombing has contaminated the soil. So there'll be a great effort to decontaminate the soil. Now it's going to cost another quite a bit of money. In that context, it's going to be important to see what kind of business environment develops in the post-war environment. Obviously, the type of peace settlement that's achieved, and eventually there will be some kind of settlement. That peace settlement is going to impact how the business community views the situation in Ukraine. From my perspective, I think a lot of the initial investments in Ukraine will have to be stimulated by international organizations as well as bilaterally by governments, because they're the only two entities that'll have the huge amounts of money that'll be necessary to help start stimulating the rebuilding of Ukraine's infrastructure, in particular, the electrical grid system, the transportation system, for example. And I think private investment is going to run parallel with that, and then much more clearly after the large government and international organization investments take place. And the private sector, I think, and our private sector members will be speaking here shortly, can shed light on this, will be limited to a certain extent, or would judge their investments by the return on investments. What kind of peace settlement evolves that might impact future relations between Ukraine and Russia. In short, basically, will investments take place if there's a chance that a war might break out again? So there are a lot of problems that still lie even in a post-war Ukraine in terms of investment. But going back to Senator Hayward's comments, his comments elicited support as well as optimism, and I stand with the senator on that. And with that background and with the senator's comments, I'd like to open the floor to discussions. We have a lot of panelists tonight, so I'd like to ask each panelist to try to limit themselves to about 10 minutes at maximum in their opening remarks. And then, of course, we're going to open the session to questions from our audience. So I'd like to go in the order that Jonathan presented each of the panelists. So Anatoli, first of all, congratulations on your role. And if Anatoli, if you could start us off with the discussion tonight, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador Popadiuk, and it's wonderful to see you again. And I want to thank, excuse me, Manor College and Dr. Perry for inviting me this evening. I'm grateful to hear from all the panelists this evening. And I also want to acknowledge Senator Haywood. Senator, you were actually one of the first elected officials that I met in the Philadelphia area when I first moved out approximately 13 years ago to Philadelphia. And I keep following your work there in District 4 and also the work that you do for the greater Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So thank you everything that you do, Senator, and for your support of Ukraine. In terms of our panelists, I do want to recognize that I recently actually had a chance to meet Bob at a World Affairs Council event in Philadelphia, where Dr. Perry was present as well, and Irina at an event at Ukraine House in Washington, D.C. So I do look forward to having a chance to finally meet Alexander and Misha in person sometime in the near future, so we can all collaborate in person and talk about our respective industries. But being here this evening, I'm going to start off by talking about the banking sector and what the credit unions in the United States that specifically serve Ukrainian Americans have been able to accomplish for the last 70 years, and some of our forward planning, in addition to some of the support that we are lending to credit unions in Ukraine. Ambassador Popadiuk mentioned the agricultural sector in Ukraine, which is something very much that credit unions in Ukraine are involved in. But first of all, let me start off by this. Everybody in their life needs credit at some point. And everybody also has a want or a need to be able to save money. In the early 1950s, a group of Ukrainian immigrants in multiple cities across the entire United States, whether it was Philadelphia, New York City, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Rochester, New York, established credit unions for their respective communities. This was innovative at the time and also based on the principles of the cooperative banking movement in Ukraine from the early 1900s. And I truly believe that this is a great example of early Ukrainian resiliency. And it's important to note that the United States federal government passed the Federal Credit Union Act in 1934. So this was relatively a new banking concept in the United States at the time when these Ukrainian American credit unions were founded, starting in 1951. Those early years established a foundation for generations of Ukrainian Americans to access credit and to safeguard hard-earned money. These credit unions provided that in addition to supporting countless organizations, religious communities, educational institutions, and social and cultural events. Now let's fast forward to 2024. There are now 10 credit unions in the United States that serve 130,000 Americans of Ukrainian descent. And as you heard from earlier, the combined asset value of those institutions is just north of $4 billion. So any business owner, entrepreneur, CEO, C-suite executive knows the importance of scale and developing, obviously, new members, new clients, new customers, retaining those clients, and the necessity to have a vision for growth and that it can take shape in various forms. The question is, which form do you want to take it? So let's pause there for a moment. Those early credit unions in the 1950s focused on savings and access to various forms of credit, including homeownership. Then a growing need for financing second homes or investment properties blossomed and eventually turned into a market for mixed-use properties. So the generation of immigrants in the early 1950s, for the course of the last 70 years, have invested into real estate in the United States and have done well for themselves. And what we're starting to see and I think many of us on this panel are aware of that in our communities, that there's a larger entrepreneurial network growing in our communities across not one, but multiple generations. So returning to the statement that I started with earlier, everybody needs credit at some point. You, Roman Popadiuk, speak earlier about two of the nation's largest credit unions serving Americans of Ukrainian descent are merging. That's Ukrainian Self-Reliance Federal Credit Union. We're based in Philadelphia, but we have multiple locations throughout the region, including in Trenton and Baltimore, and also Self-Reliance New York Federal Credit Union that's based in Manhattan with additional branches in Queens, Long Island, and Kerhonkson. We announced that we're forming a new credit union from the two legacy organizations. This will happen pending regulatory approval in 2025. Well, let's take a look at the data points of a new credit union. $1.9 billion in assets, over 32,000 member clients, $1.5 billion in deposits, and a loan portfolio of $1.1 billion, and over 110 employees that will have new career growth opportunities. So the $1 million question of this evening, and based on innovation, how did we get there? And it's a fairly simple concept. We had a missing conversation. That's the innovation. But it's important to define what is that missing conversation. And it was based on the following principles. What's in the best interest of our member clients for each organization combined, and what's looking in the future? What's best for our respective community? I mentioned various regions. Now we have to think about what is a community from Kerhonkson to Manhattan all the way down to Washington, D.C. And what's important for our respective teams, the employees, the ones who make everything happen from day to day. When we asked ourselves those questions, the answers came naturally. The credit union will be able to offer a faster delivery of consumer banking needs, but invest more into our organizations and assist that growing entrepreneurial community across the United States. Access to credit, that's your financing best friend. So we want to make sure that this new credit union champions those entrepreneurs. And finally, I want to mention that the 7 decades of expertise within the Ukrainian American credit union industry has also been leveraged to help credit unions in Ukraine. Again, as you heard earlier from Ambassador Popadiuk, the agricultural industry in Ukraine needs various forms of credit. And this is where credit unions in Ukraine have served a major purpose in the last, since February 24th of 2022. Now, credit unions in Ukraine have experienced challenges over the last 30 years, but there's a group that has strengthened their balance sheets and developed new ways to conduct business under the supervision of the National Bank of Ukraine, which is in itself is an innovation. Because previously, credit unions were regulated by the insurance industry in Ukraine, but now they're actually under the financial National Bank of Ukraine. So these capacity building initiatives have been funded by USAID and have been administered by a team from the World Council of Credit Unions, who have engaged credit union executives from within the Ukrainian American Credit Union Association, including myself, to provide assistance based on our respective experiences. We've talked anywhere from regulatory reforms that the U.S. government's National Credit Union Administration has been helpful with to provide to the National Bank of Ukraine, to even simple business development tactics and how to execute really good membership relationships, ensuring that you have a generational relationship as opposed to a transactional one. So that's a little bit about credit unions in the United States have grown over decades, and now we're starting to leverage that experience in Ukraine. I anticipate that there will be much more dialogue over the next decades and sharing better practices with each other. So to conclude, thank you, Dr. Perry, for the opportunity to talk about how our credit union business is in thousands in the United States and having a direct impact in Ukraine.
Anatoli, thank you very much. It's good seeing you again, and I appreciate your outline of how the credit union process is unfolding and the impact it can have and is having in Ukraine. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions that'll tie in with this at the end of our session. So thank you once again, Anatoli. Let's move over to Bob now.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and Dr. Perry for inviting me. I'm the CEO of Rajant Corporation. We're based in Malvern, and I think we have a bit of an interesting story about how we got involved in Ukraine. about 2 years ago, I was looking to acquire was an American company, which I won't name. And the technology was very interesting. It was a way of distributing computing power across a network from node to node to node. So while we make radios that send data, this technology that I was looking at actually sent the processing and distributed logically the ability basically to spread a computer across many, many physical locations. And that was really intriguing to me. And as I looked at this American company that had really great technology, they had less than great management, and they were on the edge of being defunct. And as we did our research about the technology, it turned out that most of the quality technology had been developed by a group of engineers in Ukraine. They were very impressive. And so ultimately, I decided not to acquire the company, but I was really intrigued by the Ukrainian engineering talent that I had met during our due diligence process. So last year, move forward to early 2023, I happened to be about to leave on a 49-day trip that would circle the whole planet, where I would meet with customers and partners around the world. We're now doing business in over 80 countries. So this was a 49-day trip to 16 countries, and I think involved 36 flights. And I happened to be in Poland, and I said to my team, I was in Krakow. I said, how far are we from the Ukrainian border?
Mhm.
And they were like, well, why do you want to know? And I said, well, we were supposed to head to Istanbul shortly for 5 days. And I'm like, well, why do we need to be in Istanbul for 5 days? They said, well, we're 90 minutes or so from the Ukrainian border. So I said, well, why don't we go visit those folks that we've been meeting online? They're in Lviv, and so my sales guys were really pretty nervous about this because there's a war going on. And apparently, most businesses are coming this way, and so my team's much younger than me, and they were skeptical. And I said, "I tell you what, you knuckleheads, I'm going. I don't really care what you do." And they decided to sign up with me. They didn't want the old man to go in by himself, and we arranged to have the Ukrainian engineers from Lviv. They met us at the border. It was like a 5-hour security line for your vehicle to get into Ukraine. And my team thought, well, this will discourage Bob. And I said, well, why don't we just walk across the border? Why don't we hire a car, bring us to the border checkpoint? We'll walk in. They'll meet us on the other side. So we ultimately arranged for that. We went through the border checkpoint, took only a minute or two to walk in. And they seemed somewhat surprised by people with American passports walking in. I did have one of my sales guys wanted to take a picture of us, and that managed to bother a few people, photographs, and that drew some automatic weapons out. And it was very interesting. So we got met on the other side, and by about 7 or 8 of the folks from this office in Lviv, we went to a restaurant about 30 minutes away. And they were extraordinarily impressive. They had impressed us in our due diligence meetings online. And then meeting them in person was really compelling. And I left that meeting. We met for a couple hours in a restaurant about 30 minutes from the border on the Ukrainian side. And I said, I'm going to hire all of you, and plus the folks that had remained back in Lviv, and we're going to open an office in Lviv. So that was in March, and over the June-July time period, we did hire everyone and open an office in Lviv. And I went back last October to visit them in Lviv, and there I have to say this. And I encourage all the American executives that I meet, that the talent there is extraordinary. What this team has done for us it's a 12-person team, but the amount of high quality engineering output that they deliver at a pace that we just don't see anywhere else is astonishing. It's world-class in quality, and the speed is excessively compelling and attractive, the amount of work they do in the short amount of time it takes for them to do it. So, I'm always, pushing the fellow that runs our office over there to bring me more employees. It's literally, the team is able to compete with anyone on the planet from a computer science perspective and an electrical engineering perspective. And they have advanced our product offering, which is being used in the US and ultimately will find its way into US military application. And our team really is so great now because they're actually pushing my US engineers because of the pace at which they operate and the quality. And there's a interesting cultural distinction that I've noticed as well. They simply operate without guile. They just blurt out the truth over there in an engineering sense, which is like shockingly wonderful and elegant. I mean, we don't waste 6 months with somebody having misled us. They say, well, this is not working and here's what you have to do. And okay, now we know. And so I just admire the bluntness. There's nothing better than an engineer who tells you the truth, right? So then you can figure out what to do and you don't waste any time. So this team is, everybody from Ukraine and anybody with a Ukrainian background should be very proud of the capabilities these folks demonstrate. They're in Lviv, so they're not under fire every day, but they are under fire once in a while. And when I visited there, they made a big fuss that I had come to visit. And it was very humbling because I was there for 4 hours or whatever. They're there every day. And, while I was there, the building, I believe, had our office has at the top of a 5-story building. And as I looked down, I looked across into the downtown of Lviv, and you saw a couple of buildings that had been bombed out by the Russians. I don't know whether it was drones or missiles or what had hit various residential buildings, and that was sobering. But as I looked down in the courtyard, there were school-aged children in the courtyard of this building, and so I said, well, what happens? They, was there a school here? And they said, yes, in the first floor. I said, well, what happens if there's an inbound missile or a rocket? What do the students do? And they said, well, we have this Waze app kind of thing on a phone that alerts us as to inbound projectiles. And we get 15 to 30 minutes of warning. So I said, well, what do the teachers and students do? And they said, well, they go to a bunker in the basement and continue their lessons. And I was just trying to picture, my office is out in Malvern. I just wondered if we had an inbound missile in Malvern, would people continue their lessons? And I suspect not. So the courage with which the team and their fellow citizens of that town go about their business is really, it's inspirational. And the quality of the work is really special. So while I've said to other people that have kind of abandoned Ukraine during the war, I think you're going the wrong direction. That you ought to find your way back in to work with these folks, and you won't be disappointed. So that's been the Rajant story over the last year or so in Ukraine. And frankly, we're looking to expand our presence there if we can, because of the quality, the talent, the quality of the people. And that's the Rajant story.
Bob, thank you very much for sharing those comments. I have to say one thing, we hear a lot of stories and reports about investments in the country, what sectors are growing, which are challenging, et cetera, but we don't hear much about the Ukrainian workforce, and it's very good that you brought that to the fore. From my experience, and I'm sure the experience of everyone on this panel, if we get into it, Ukrainians are very adaptable and innovative, as you relayed, and are provide a very good and knowledgeable and educated workforce. So I'm very pleased that you were able to bring that to the fore. So thanks for sharing that. Now I think I'll turn to Irina. Irina, it's good seeing you. Welcome. And congratulations on all that you're doing at USUBC.
Thank you very much, Roman, Ambassador Popadiuk. Thank you to Manor College and to Dr. Perry for inviting me. This is my first time. I understand that this is a series of webinars, and this is my first time, so I'm very pleased to be here. US-Ukraine Business Council was established in 1995, so it's a venerable institution. It was established in Washington, D.C., so it's a US-based trade association. And we have been working ever since on very actively on bilateral trade and business relations, supporting our members who invest in Ukraine, who do business in Ukraine or with Ukraine. And gradually, we started, of course, with US businesses going into Ukraine. But gradually, we also started accepting Ukrainian businesses, which are going in the opposite direction into the United States. So now we have 230 members, US and Ukrainian companies, multinationals. Our current goals are to support Ukraine through to victory and to take an active part in massive rebuilding that will occur after the war ends. However, there is an impression in the United States very often that rebuilding is somewhere far away, that right now there is nothing to do in Ukraine. And I think the story that Bob told us proves just the opposite. There is a lot going on in Ukraine. Ukraine is open for business. If you pass by on M Street in Washington, D.C., the Ukrainian embassy has a big poster on it saying open for business. And this is actually true. This is the experience of our members. This is the experience of us as the organization. We are open for business, both in Washington, D.C. and in Kyiv. Actually, I'm in Kyiv right now. Many of our members are dually based, so they have staff in the United States and in Ukraine, and they just go ahead and invest and work and achieve great results. We have seen a pretty strong growth in our membership of the defense sector, which is natural, of course, but also of IT sector, agro sector. So we are seeing across the cross-sectoral sort of growth and interest in Ukraine. And that's the message that I think is very important to convey to the general public at large in the United States, but also to businesses. Senator Haywood said or named 3 components, which are freedom, dignity, and creativity. These 3 components are crucial to have a robust private sector, and that's what Ukraine has and is fighting for. And Ambassador Popadiuk was talking about 2 major components for rebuilding Ukraine, which is international financial institutions and governments on one hand, and private sector on the other hand. So I think it's really important that today your webinar is devoted to private sector engagement. That's one of the main driving forces for progress in Ukraine. Our organization has been run for 20 years by a legendary late president, Morgan Williams. Many of you have known him. He didn't have any Ukrainian blood in him, but he always said, I'm Ukrainian by choice. And he devoted 20 years of his life to serving our membership, but also to doing the best he can to support Ukrainian culture and to support the causes that were crucial for Ukrainian nation. And that's something that set a great example to us as an organization and our members. We continue what Morgan has been doing. And one example is that Morgan has been collecting a huge, vast collection of artworks and books devoted to Holodomor. And yesterday in Kyiv, we had a commemoration dinner for Morgan, and this collection was gifted to the National Holodomor Museum. So this engagement is very important for private sector. We want to make sure that our members are not there just to do business, but they become part of the community. They support the community, whatever the goals may be. I know that Manor College is the beneficiary of a collection that was gifted to Manor College by Rudominski family, resilience project that they have started. And for us is an example of what can be done. Morgan, Rudominski family, what can be done and what should be done to support Ukrainian history, Ukrainian culture, and all the causes that are important. So I just want to underline that private sector is there right now to help Ukraine and will be there even more forcefully to rebuild Ukraine, but also to support other goals which are dear to the hearts of Ukrainian nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina. Morgan Williams, I'm sure all the panelists are familiar in one way or another with Morgan. Did a superb job in running the organization for many years, as you pointed out. And I know that you will continue that legacy and build on it very strongly, Irina. We have the utmost faith in you in doing so. I do want to take one thing away from what you mentioned, and that is that Ukraine is open for business now. You're absolutely right. Business is taking place, as Bob so rightly pointed out, with his own company operating in Ukraine. People should not be under the impression that because the war is there, that Ukraine is shut down. There is an active business sector in Ukraine and investment taking place in Ukraine. So thank you for highlighting that again. And USUBC, of course, is in the forefront of advocating that and helping Ukraine, American business get into Ukraine and to work with Ukrainian businesses. So thank you very much, Irina. Our next speaker is Alex. Alex, it's good to see you again. Alex, if I have transparency here, I think I know Alex probably longer than most of the other people on the panel that I'm familiar with. So Alex and I actually go back many years, and we've worked on business deals together. So I just want to be transparent about that. So Alex, it's good to see you again. I'm glad you could join us, and the floor is yours.
Likewise, Ambassador. Thank you, Dr. Perry, Manor College. Thank you for inviting me. Roman, Ambassador Popadiuk, thank you for suggesting me. It's an honor to be here, and I know a number of panelists and number of people in the audience, and those who I have not met yet. I would like an opportunity to soon. I have been working in Ukraine since 1996, and over the years we have a small firm which was involved with financing, developmental financing, U.S. government research, using U.S. government programs for risk management and financing, and we've also been focused on capital markets. Since 1996, up until the beginning of the war in February of 2022, we have been involved in a number of very interesting projects in Ukraine, which ranged from space exploration for a joint venture called Sea Launch to financing energy facilities in Ukraine and healthcare projects for the government of Ukraine. So we have gained a lot of experience working with the U.S. government trade and development agencies like DFC, U.S. Exim Bank, what used to be called OPIC, U.S. Trade and Development Agency, because those are invaluable tools that the U.S. government has to help foreign investors, to help U.S. investors enter foreign markets, whether it's for trade or for investment. And by the time February 24th rolled around, I did not believe, after working for decades in Ukraine and being involved, I did not believe that the wider war would start. But when I woke up at 4:30 in the morning and I saw that it began, after the shock wore off, in March of 2022, myself and several folks with whom I've been working over the years, we knew that we did not know when the war was going to end. We did not know what would be the final footprint of Ukraine after the war, the conflict would be over. But we were absolutely convinced that Ukraine will prevail and emerge as an independent country. We also knew that in order for Ukraine to rebuild, it would need a lot of capital. It would need risk mitigation for investors. And we knew, unfortunately, that some of the projects and some of the agencies with which we're involved, because they're so busy, they have large scopes of work in multiple countries, the project preparation and the project execution takes a long time. So we decided to form an organization which would start working on the projects before the war would end, before any sort of resolution would be even in sight, because we were so confident. So we got about 50 organizations together, 85% or so were US, about 10% were Ukrainian, and the rest were European. And we thought we came together under an umbrella of Rebuilding Ukraine Agency. And I say this purposely, there is a double negative. We are not a non-for-profit. We're a member-owned organization, which the first rapid response organizations, which has been formed in 2022. Initially, when there was a lot of what I call the Rara factor, the patriotic wave, 2022 was a very, very a good year. Number of companies joined. Everybody wanted to do business. There was an exhibit put on in Warsaw, Rebuilding Ukraine exhibit. It was one of the most unbelievable events I've ever attended, with thousands of people, 22 countries attending, looking to do business in Ukraine. Fast forward, and we had members starting projects, private projects such as construction material production, because that would be a critical, one of the critical elements needed for reconstruction. Folks looking to finance plate glass production plants, folks looking to do demining, demining for the farmers and improve the farming infrastructure in Ukraine. So there was a tremendous, tremendous upheaval. It was very, very positive energy. And then things hit the wall a little bit somewhere in the beginning of 2023, because we kind of reflect what's going on in the country, and things started to get a little bit slower. The government was not performing as expected, and a lot of the war fatigue set in, and it got to the point where our board, we have a board of 8 members, we had a meeting and basically trying to reevaluate what would happen going forward, because it did not look terrific from the standpoint of investment, from the standpoint of U.S. support on the trade and development front. Things did not look fantastic. So we decided to pause. We froze our memberships for the year, and This lasted till about June, July of this year. And then all of a sudden, something very, very interesting started to take place. About the time where the Kursk offensive took place, we noticed a tremendous resurgence. We now have a $445 million project for the U.S. Nuclear providers to build 2 reactors in Ukraine to replace the infrastructure, which was unfortunately destroyed and damaged. So companies, Westinghouse and a company called Holtec, are working to develop the infrastructure both for production and for spent nuclear fuel. The spent nuclear fuel facility in Ukraine is a phase 2, has an interesting story to it. Ambassador Popadiuk and I worked on this together. In 2018, we arranged financing and breach of contract insurance to finance a spent nuclear fuel storage facility in Chernobyl. It was a $250 million transaction with the US DFC insurance and US capital markets providing the financing. This allowed Ukraine to gain a great degree of energy independence, because prior to that, Ukraine was exporting its spent nuclear fuel storage, spent nuclear fuel to Russia, Russia then took most precious metals and sent the remaining schlum back to Ukraine. And Ukraine paid about $200 million a year for the privilege. So with this project, it was a breakthrough project, the first financing of its kind, 20 years. So we financed this, and in 2018, and in 2022, the facility was completed and promptly occupied by the Russians. And everybody was absolutely petrified, but yet, as the war went on, Energoatom, which was the borrower, continued. Not a single payment was missed by Ukrainians. Not a single payment, even despite of the currency restrictions which existed, which were put on in order to combat the flight of capital. So that was an amazing, amazing feat that during the war, Ukrainian borrowers performed as better than expected. So now we're doing the second phase, and Westinghouse is going to build 2 new nuclear reactors for Energoatom. We're also working in the Zakarpattia region to help a local family, a prominent U.S. family with Carpathian roots, to build a rehabilitation facility, balneological rehabilitation facility, and real estate development. And our members who are developing the facility for the plant for manufacturing of insulation is back on track. So things have been restarted, which to us indicates a fair amount of optimism in what's going on, although it's difficult to predict when the hostilities will stop. The business is investing, and to me, that's always a terrific indicator of things to come, because folks in business are pretty instinctive, and if there's investment going in, it's a good things on the horizon. Thank you.
Very much, Alex. I'm glad you mentioned the resurgence in interest in Ukraine, because that dovetails with what Irina reported, in the sense that there's a lot of private sector business going on. And as you noted in your comments, there's a resurgence over the past few months of interest in Ukraine. I expect that will only continue to grow. So thank you very much for your comments. And Misha will conclude with your comments, and then we'll open the floor to questions.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Roman, for introducing. It is a very interesting experience for me, because I don't think I ever heard about myself in Ukraine and being addressed from they, them as much. I'm myself born and raised in Kiev. I'm myself currently in Kiev. That's what we're sharing currently with Irina. It's 2:30 a.m. in Kiev. So Irina, you're holding well, I can see. I thought I'll be the only one, but yeah, it's nice to have somebody in the same situation. So yeah, I specifically while listening to everyone, I think I rethought the entire kind of opening because it is, it is interesting to hear so much about, again, they're saying, they, them, while they, them is you being here in Ukraine and building business here. I'm, while being born and raised here, I studied in Boston, in the US, studied in University of British Columbia, in Vancouver, Canada. I studied in Italy. I made a decision to come back after all of that to Ukraine. Before the full-scale invasion started, it wasn't, connected to that. It was a decision made in the process of studying abroad that my place to build business and innovative entrepreneurship is in Ukraine with, as Bob mentioned, was very good and proficient workforce we have here, with great engineers, with great work ethics. And yeah, it's not something that, I need to make a choice of daily, or it's something just kind of seems natural, obviously, while being here. It also was mentioned, the defense industry is very much something that Ukraine is currently striving at, and probably will be a big part of the, future Ukrainian economic kind of regrowth. And part of that, Himera is very much a new defense company based in Ukraine. We started after the start of the full-scale invasion as a reaction to what was happening and what we, firsthand saw in the experience by Ukrainian defense forces. My co-founder, one of my co-founders himself went into territorial defense in Kiev, saw himself the communications issues experienced in the Ukrainian defense forces. In the beginning, we were starting what we're doing is, exclusively resolve the issues we saw in Ukraine. In the process, we actually learned that every other, we focus on and try to work primarily with liberal democracies, but every military, every defense force in the world experience the same issues. The existing solutions are very often outdated and not prepared to scale at kind of affordable manner for future risks. We saw it in Ukraine with Russia, and we understand that very similar experiences are present among a lot of our allies. And obviously we want, with all the future risks to also equip our allies with the instruments that they're equipping us currently. And most of you being in the US, obviously equip our allies, including the US, with the instruments built because we can sustain the country currently. At the beginning, Ukraine could prevail because of two things. One, obviously people who didn't budge, but also because of the support we got in the beginning. I think now it's in many ways is kind of turning the tide where because we could continue working, because we could innovate and work with our defense forces to create solutions that are now, and I believe in the future, will be a backbone of a lot of the existing NATO and other allies countries technologies that in future will benefit every NATO state and outside that will be on the right side of history. And we as the company build communication solutions for our defense forces. We currently already had some tests and working on entering the US market, and that's in 2.5 years from inception of the company. We already had tests with some of the units in the Special Operations Command in the US, and we see interest in specific products are created for because one side, the reliability and relevancy of what we can make in Ukraine by working directly with the users, and on the other side, scalability and affordability, because Ukraine is not going to use something that is hugely expensive and not provided in enough quantities. So we had to make something that is relevant, but also scalable and affordable, and that is apparently not only needed in Ukraine, but by almost everyone. And so, I think it's hard for me to relate to a lot of the thoughts that were shared here because, I'm on the other side. It's not something that, again, the decision needs to be made. I need some. I'm more of showing that it just can come naturally. Obviously, I am biased because I am in Ukraine, but I think kind of as an example of what we do at Himera, what we're also doing is some of my other enterprises. Probably just don't want to kind of take too much time to kind of go into other things. I think Himera is just a very good example of what can be done if you just continue doing the things and if you kind of seize the opportunity. On one side, we are very much helping the Ukraine in the current moment in the defensibility of our country, but also on the other side, we do believe a lot, and with hopefully soon kind of easement of export control in Ukraine for defense and dual use products, very soon, I mean, before anything that can be called, a victory or peace or whatever that's going to be, right? We can already start bringing export income into Ukraine. Pay taxes on that, pay fees on border control and all of that, and reinvest what we've built in the last 2.5 years. And capitalize on that and bring that value back into Ukraine by manufacturing our products into Ukraine and then delivering them to users globally. I think this is completely different from what I thought I was going to be talking about today. But I think after hearing this, I think what I really wanted to focus on, and happy to kind of answer more questions. And very interesting experience for me. Very, very happy to be part of this call, and I like kind of what everyone is doing here, and still felt a bit objectified today, to be honest, with being talked in the third party matter a bit. But thank you. Happy to kind of be part of this and continue the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Misha, for your comments and for all the work that you do in the defense sector. I wish you continued success in that sector. As you know, that sector is important for two reasons. Number one is the economic growth, the overall economic growth of Ukraine, but also obviously in terms of maintaining its own defense capabilities. So I wish you continued success in that, in your work. I also want to thank you and Irina, because I guess our audience didn't realize you were both in Kiev, and it's, as you mentioned, I think 2:30 or 3 a.m. approximately in Kiev. So you're up, it's a late night, early morning, I guess, for both of you. So thank you for being with us. That concludes the presentation of our panelists. I'd like to thank all of them for their wonderful presentations. And I'd like to open the floor to questions. But of course, being the moderator, I have the privilege of asking the first question. And so I'd like to just throw a generic question out there. And I'd like to pick up on something that Misha mentioned, the need to ease export controls. And he was talking specifically about the defense sector. But let me just throw out a general question. There are a lot of people that are listening to this, or there are a lot of other people that you are in contact with that would like to undertake investment in Ukraine, don't know how to go about it, and wonder what some of the hurdles are. From your own experiences, what are some of the hurdles that people may have to face in trying to establish a presence in Ukraine, a business presence? Or let me rephrase it differently. What should the Ukrainian government be doing now to attract more foreign direct investment? So I'll just throw it open to the floor, whoever wants to take that question. Not everybody at once. Yes, Irina.
Irina, you muted yourself by accident.
You asked
Okay, go ahead.
the Ukrainian government can do to attract investment. But it's not only the job of the government, it's also the job of private sector. And the Ukrainian counterparties, companies like Misha's company and companies like Alex's company, which know Ukraine very well, which know what's going on, organizations like USUBC. So it's not only an effort by the government. There is plenty of information available, but this information is really muted by the war. You know, everything that people are reading outside of Ukraine is the war, is the devastation. So I think what the government should be doing, probably letting the world know that Ukraine is open for business, and also encouraging investment. There is an investment agency inside the government. They do roadshows, they travel around the world, but still it's not enough. There should be more propaganda in a good sense, propaganda of Ukraine as a place to do business. But the private sector has to play its role as well. It's impossible for the government, you know, which is overstretched right now with the war, with defending the country, also to be, you know, constantly helping the investments to come in. But of course, the good stories, you know, the success stories. And we heard 2 success stories today, actually 3, from Alex, from Misha, from Bob. There are unfortunately also the stories of not so successful ventures. So we need to make sure that the success stories are being heard. But reforms also are important. As you all know, Ukraine is on the path to joining the European Union. So that triggers major reforms. Ukrainian legislation is being reformed constantly to comply with the EU regulations. So that's part of the story as well, that in a few years, Ukraine will be part of the European Union. And that should also encourage businesses to come in, but you don't hear that very much. So I would say it's a job, it takes a village to answer your question, Ambassador Popadiuk. It takes a village to tell the world that Ukraine is open for business, and that, you know, what needs to be done to improve the investment climate.
As an outsider, I would, you know, in one of the issues that's always on my mind, it's an unfair issue, but it's a real issue. And I understand there's not an easy answer, but I often wake up wondering whether the young engineers, the men that work for me, are they going to be pulled out of the job and sent into the fight? And I just don't know. I mean, you know, it's just a difficult circumstance. So that's a risk that, you know, someone like me has to confront, that as people become more important to the work we do, will they just they go home on a Friday and they may not be there on a Monday because they just have to go fight. You know, so I understand the complexity of dealing with that, because, you know, there's a war going on, but nevertheless, it does create a risk in the minds of somebody who's hiring people in Ukraine. And I don't have an answer for that. I just know it exists as a concern.
Bob, can I say something?
Yes.
I have 2 cousins that are at risk, and what they do is they work out of the house.
Yeah. Because
if they go outside, they can be arrested.
Yeah.
And sent to the front after six weeks training.
Yeah, so everybody who's online was.
I think Alex wanted to say something, Jonathan.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Alex.
Yes. So to answer your question, and like Irina said, I agree that it takes a village. There is a huge component of the U.S. government. We have a U.S. government has a wonderful organization called U.S. Commercial Service. Normally, that's one of the places where U.S. investors seeking to invest or export into other countries go to first. They need to. They were so stretched because of the war, because of the embassy situation in Kiev. I think more resources for them from the U.S. government would be terrific, because those folks do a phenomenal job cultivating U.S. investors. The U.S. UBC, our organization, offer very good support, but U.S. Commercial Service and U.S. government trade and development arm, I think, should be a little bit more active in helping educate U.S. companies, because we have an inherent disadvantage by being so far away. European countries have a much easier time they're closer. They drive to the number of events, which are conferences, which have been set up in Europe, which attract Ukrainians who come in over the border to visit them. For us here, it's a little bit more difficult because of the geography. So we need to be more proactive. And the basis, the number of US companies which invested before the war, now some companies see more opportunities and other companies are afraid. And unless they're being educated and constantly there is communications, I agree with Irina, communications has to be absolutely constant, but that's the only way to have to inform US companies which are working in a number of other markets that Ukraine is open for business and phenomenal opportunities do exist.
Thank you very much to Bob and Irina and to Alex for your views on this issue. Jonathan, I don't think I see any questions in the chat room, unless I'm mistaken here. Do you have any questions that from the audience or that someone's trying to pose?
Any questions from our audience here today?
I do realize we're running out of time here, or we're getting close to the end of our time, so.
I have one, Roman.
Go for it.
I'm curious about the opinions of each of our leaders who are on today about how vocal they can be regarding Russia's abomination of behavior, this war on Ukraine, how vocal they think they can be in light of their particular corporations, but also, what their advice might be to other leaders who do not have a close Ukrainian connection, and how that might impact their business. So maybe if some can share on that.
Well, I can comment. A couple of weeks ago, you had the World Affairs Council event, and I took a picture with Irina and Ivan Fedorov, and I posted it on Facebook. The with a little blip about the event and my supporting and having an office over there. And now, fortunately, I have a great IT department, but we have been getting hammered with IT cyber attacks out of Russia, out of Iran, out of Pakistan, since just posting that picture. Now, is it a coincidence? I don't know. I'm not a big believer in coincidence. So I just think, if you're gonna, and it's a country and a people that deserves support, and it does, and the people do. I think you just have to expect that there's going to be some incoming consequences, and that's just part of the fight for freedom. It's not cost free, and given what the folks under fire really face, it's not that big a deal to have some cyber attacks and other things. But I just think one has to be prepared that the Russians, they're not playing around, and when you stick your head up over here in the U.S., there's probably going to be a consequence, and that's okay, right? Because this is not a consequence-free thing. But that was just very, very interesting to me what happened just as a result of participating and posting an image on Facebook.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, in case some don't know, that picture was with the governor of Zaporizhia.
Right.
Yeah, who came over to the U.S. for a very brief period of time.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Bob. Jonathan, I think we're running out of time here, and I don't see any other questions unless our panelists want to volunteer for final comments. So give the floor to them. Any last minute comments by any of our panelists?
Yeah, if I can, again,
Go ahead, Misha.
might be very much biased, but anytime, I don't think, and again, understanding everyone can be a very different conditions. We have Ukrainians here, we have American-born Ukrainians here, we have, by choice Ukrainian, as Bob mentioned a bit, and thing is, I think the only obvious answer to the question of, how should you approach the risks and all of it is that you're either on the right side of history or you're not. There's very much, business is business, but there are certain things where it's just non-negotiable. If somebody does business with Russia, you don't do business with them. I've been lucky enough to not do, to make the decision fairly good time before the full-scale invasion, and so when it started, we didn't have to cut any ties because we already didn't do any business with Russia. But I think the only right answer to the question how vocal you should be, about Russia's war in Ukraine is that very vocal. With any opportunity there is, it needs to be stated, it needs to be openly communicated that what Russia is doing is horrible. Russia, shouldn't be allowed to do it, should be sanctioned, should be limited and basically closed from the world, because with what they're doing, they only bring, destruction and deaths, and that's not something that has any place to be tolerated for whatever the reasons you might have. So again, being a bit biased here, obviously, but I think that's the only right answer to such a question.
Sure, very well put. I think everyone on the panel shares your sentiments that this is a war of aggression. Ukraine is fighting for its freedom, and everyone has to be on the right side of history, as you said in your opening comments toward the end here. So I think everyone shares those sentiments, and we all should need to speak out and should speak out against the Russian aggression in support of Ukraine. And Slava Ukraini. With that, Jonathan, I think we've come to an end of our panel today. Thank you for letting me moderate this panel. I'll turn it over to you for closing comments then.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And how about we'll just share a round of applause for all of our speakers and Ambassador. And even if you're at home, you can still stop at home, even if we can't hear you. So thank you again to all of our speakers. I also want to share a special thank you with our marketing office and everyone in it. Kelly Pfeiffer, Anthony Machinsky, Allison Myers, our advancement office, who is Tom Sims over there is our VP, for their collective support for today's program. Thank our IT office and one of our students, Kareem, for helping us with our logistics as well. Our teaser for the spring is to keep your eye out for our 18th program. And what we're going to do is try to gather the voices on congressmen and congresswomen who have personally visited Ukraine. So I'm going to ask you all to please keep our work here at Manor College and Ukraine and the Middle East and Manor and our students in your prayers. So thank you and God bless you. Have a good night.